Clara Mae Dunbar didn't cry when the deputy nailed the eviction notice to her door. She didn't cry when she sold her wedding ring for stage fare. She didn't cry when every business on Main Street told her no, not with children, not a widow, not her kind of trouble. She cried once. In the mud, in the rain, with her daughter's hand in hers and her son trying not to shake. That was the moment Hal Brixton rode past and stopped. If this story lands somewhere in your chest, subscribe right now. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far Clara's story travels. The stage from Billings dropped Clara Mae Dunbar and her 2 children at the edge of Sweetwater Junction on the hottest Thursday in August of 1883. And the driver didn't even wait for her trunk to hit the ground before he slapped the reins and moved on. She stood in the street with dust still settling around her boots and looked at the town the way a person looks at a hand of cards they already know is bad. She looked at it straight. She counted what she had. She figured her next move. Tommy was beside her with his jaw set and his eyes forward, 10 years old, and already carrying the particular stillness of a boy who has decided that showing what he feels is a luxury he can't afford. Lily had her fingers locked around the back of Clara's skirt and was not letting go. 7 years old, talking since before she could walk, and right now she was saying nothing at all. Clara had 31 cents when she left Billings. She had 22 when she stepped off the stage. The driver had charged her for the trunk, hadn't asked. Just told her the number and held out his hand, and she had paid it because there was no version of that moment where arguing helped. 22 cents. 2 children. 1 trunk. A town she had never set foot in before today. A woman she'd met at a church social in Laramie 3 months ago. A woman named Mrs. Holt, pleasant face, generous with advice about places she'd never lived, had told Clara that Sweetwater Junction was growing. Said there was work there. Said the people were decent and the land was honest, and a woman with practical skills could make something of herself in a place like that. Mrs. Holt had clearly never needed to make something of herself in her life. Clara picked up her end of the trunk. "Tommy," she said. He grabbed the other handle without being asked. He always did now. That was new. 6 months ago he would have dragged his feet and complained about the weight. 6 months ago his father was still alive and complaining was still something children were allowed to do. "Where are we going?" he asked. "To find work. And if there isn't any—" "There is," she said. "There's always work. It's just a matter of who needs it done." She said it with the confidence of a woman who had learned that her children read her tone more carefully than her words. What she felt underneath it, the cold, particular fear of a person who has run out of options and is now at the edge of the last one, she kept below the surface where it belonged. They started down the main street of Sweetwater Junction, Montana Territory, in the heat of an August afternoon, and the first thing Clara noticed was that people were watching. Not curious watching. Not friendly watching. The kind of watching that happened when a thing arrived in a small town that didn't quite fit the categories a small town had prepared for it. A widow. Young enough to matter. Children in tow. Trunk in the dust. No man beside her. No name. Anyone recognized. No connection to anyone already known. She walked to the first door with a sign in the window. The general store was run by a man named Garrett, thick-armed and efficient, who looked at her list of skills, cooking, mending accounts, nursing, and then looked at Tommy, and then looked at Lily, still gripping Clara's skirt, and said, "I don't have anything for you." "You haven't heard what I'm offering," Clara said. "I don't need to," Garrett said, not unkind, just finished. "Try the laundry." The laundry woman's name was Mrs. Pine, and she said she already had girls enough and didn't need the disruption of young ones in the workspace. She said it looking at her iron, not at Clara. Clara thanked her and left. The hotel kitchen turned her away before she finished her sentence. The seamstress 2 doors down said she had a particular clientele that required a certain atmosphere, and she was very sorry, but no. She said it with her eyes on Lily's face, on the quiet, wide-eyed expression of a 7-year-old who had seen too much and understood more of it than she should. Clara felt something tighten in her throat. She swallowed it. She thanked the seamstress and walked out. Tommy was walking beside her now, instead of behind her. She noticed when that happened, the moment when he quietly moved from following to standing alongside, as if he had made a private decision about what the situation required. He didn't say anything. He walked with his hands loose at his sides and his chin up, and she could feel the effort it cost him. There was a doctor's office on the far end of the street. She went there last because medicine was what she knew best, and she had learned in the last 6 months that saving the best option for last was a mistake. Use your strongest card first. She'd learned that the hard way. The doctor was a man of 60 with spectacles and a good suit, and a manner that suggested he had been comfortable for a long time and had come to regard comfort as his natural condition. He listened to her tell him her experience 3 years nursing her husband through a slow illness, a year and a half helping at the military field hospital outside Fort Keogh as a volunteer working knowledge of wound care, fever management, childbirth assistance. He listened carefully. He nodded in several places that suggested genuine interest. And then he said, "I appreciate your initiative, Mrs. Dunbar, but I have a practice to maintain, and my patients have certain expectations about the environment of that practice. A woman with children underfoot in a medical setting creates complications I'm not in a position to manage." "My children would not be in the office," Clara said. "I would arrange—" "It's not something I'm able to offer," he said. Pleasantly, finally. She thanked him. She walked out. She was standing in front of the doctor's office with Lily still holding her skirt, and Tommy looking at the far end of the street with an expression that was older than 10 years by several hard miles, and she was doing what she had learned to do in moments like this, feeling it all the way through, so it didn't build pressure she couldn't control later. 8 months since Daniel died. 8 months since the pneumonia took him in the middle of the night in the upstairs room of the house they'd spent 4 years building. 8 months since the debts came out. The medical debts, the supply debts, the note on the house that Daniel had signed without telling her because he was a man who believed things would work out and believed it so sincerely that he never made the arrangements for the possibility that they wouldn't. She had sold what she could sell. She had asked for help from people she had called friends and learned which ones actually were. The number had been smaller than she hoped and larger than 0, which was the only measure she allowed herself to use. She had come to Sweetwater Junction because she had run out of closer places to try. "Mama," Tommy said quietly. "I know. We've been to every place on the street." "Not every place," she said. She looked down at the end of the block. There was a building with a wide porch and lamp-lit windows, a boarding house by the look of it, with a sign she couldn't read from this distance. "There's one more. And if that one says no too—" She looked at him. His jaw was working the way it did when he was holding something back that needed to come out, and she thought about how long he had been holding things back, how long both of them had been, and she thought it was a heavy thing to ask of children. "Then we figure out what comes after that," she said. "But we don't decide it's over before we've tried the last door." He looked at her for a moment. Then he picked up his end of the trunk. "Okay," he said. They started toward the boarding house. They were halfway down the block when the sound came, not loud, not dramatic, just the particular quality of a male voice carrying across a public space, with the flat authority of a man accustomed to being heard. "Mrs. Dunbar." She stopped, turned. The man coming toward her from the direction of the general store was in his 50s, broad and well-dressed, in a way that announced money without announcing how it had been made. He had a badge on his lapel, not a sheriff's badge, something else, something that looked official in a way she couldn't immediately name. Behind him was a younger man with a notebook and the expression of someone being paid to follow and record. "I don't believe we've met," Clara said. "Judge Emmett Doyle," he said. He smiled. The smile was the kind of thing a man practiced in a mirror until it looked natural. "I administer county matters in this territory. I make it a point to welcome newcomers personally." "That's very kind," Clara said. Her voice was level. Nothing in her face moved. "Not at all. This is a growing county. We want the right kind of people to feel at home here." He looked at Tommy. He looked at Lily. He looked back at Clara with the smile still in place. "You've been making inquiries about employment today." It was not a question. "I have," Clara said. "Unsuccessfully, I'm told." She held his eyes. "So far." Doyle reached into his coat and produced a folded paper. He held it out. "As it happens, I have a matter that might be of assistance. A family on Cooperton Road is in need of a household manager. The Aldersons. Very well regarded. The position would include a room for you and your children, meals, and a reasonable wage." He paused. "A much more appropriate arrangement for a woman in your circumstances." Clara did not take the paper. "I appreciate the offer," she said. "Who told you about my circumstances?" Something shifted behind his eyes. Very small. Very fast. Gone before it settled into anything she could name. "This is a small town, Mrs. Dunbar. Word travels." "It does," she agreed. "But I've been here less than 2 hours, and I haven't introduced myself to anyone who didn't turn me away from a job. So either word travels very fast in Sweetwater Junction, or someone's been keeping track of where I've been going." The smile held. The eyes behind it went careful. "I'm simply trying to be helpful," Doyle said. "Then I thank you for the thought," Clara said. "And I'll continue making my own arrangements." She turned away from him and walked toward the boarding house. She did not look back. She kept her spine straight and her pace steady, and her face forward, and she breathed through the cold thing that was moving in her chest, because she had a 7-year-old holding her skirt, and a 10-year-old carrying half her trunk, and they were both watching her, and what they saw her do right now would be part of what they told themselves later in the dark when they needed to know what people could be. Tommy was quiet for a half a block. Then he said, "He knew your name." "Yes," Clara said. "You didn't tell it to him." "No," she said. "I didn't." "So he already knew it before he came over?" "Yes," she said. Tommy was quiet for another few steps. "I don't like him," he said. "I know," Clara said. "Remember that feeling. It's useful information." The boarding house was run by a woman named Agnes Fuller, 65 years old and white-haired, and built like someone who had been tested repeatedly by the world and had found the testing unremarkable. She looked at Clara from behind the desk in her front room, with the expression of a woman who had seen most things and reserved judgment on the ones she hadn't. "You're the widow from Billings," Agnes said. Clara set the trunk down. "Word does travel fast in this town." "Faster than you'd like, probably," Agnes said. She looked at Tommy. She looked at Lily. She looked back at Clara. "Doyle got to you." "He found me on the street," Clara said. "Offered me a position at the Alderson place." Agnes's expression didn't change, but something behind it went very still. "Did he?" "I declined." Agnes looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "Sit down, Mrs. Dunbar." Clara sat. Tommy stood beside her, which was what he always did now, and Lily climbed up onto the chair beside her and tucked herself against Clara's side and was very, very quiet. Agnes poured 2 cups of coffee without asking, set one in front of Clara, and sat down across from her. She did not offer anything pleasant or false. She just looked at Clara with the direct assessing eyes of a woman who had run a boarding house for 22 years and had learned to read people the way ranchers read weather. "What do you actually need?" Agnes asked. "Work," Clara said. "Something legitimate, something I can do with my children nearby. I have nursing experience cooking accounts." "I know what you have," Agnes said. "I mean, what do you actually need? Not the polite version, the real one." Clara was quiet for a moment. She looked at the coffee cup. She looked at the woman across from her. "I need somewhere to put my children down for a night where they're safe and dry," she said. "And I need to know if there's anyone in this town who doesn't answer to Judge Doyle." Agnes was quiet for a very long time. The sounds of the street came through the window. Wagon wheels. Someone calling a name. The ordinary noise of a town that didn't know what was sitting in this room. "There's a man," Agnes said finally. "Ranch about 4 miles north. Hal Brixton. Runs cattle and keeps to himself, and has not in 6 years done a single thing Emmett Doyle has asked him to do." "Why does that matter to me?" Clara asked. "Because Doyle has been trying to get him off that land for 2 years, Agnes said, "and hasn't managed it. And because a man that Doyle can't move is a man who might be harder to threaten than most." She turned her coffee cup in her hands. "He's been running short since spring. Lost his cook in April. Lost a ranch hand before that. He's working that place mostly alone." She paused. "He's not an easy man." "I'm not looking for easy," Clara said. "I'm looking for honest." Agnes looked at her. Something shifted in the old woman's face. Not warmth exactly, but a kind of recognition, one careful person acknowledging another. "Then you might try Hal Brixton," she said. "He's in town today. Livery probably. Big man, dark bay horse. Bad left hand, he won't talk about it, so don't ask." Clara stood up. She reached into her pocket and set 2 pennies on the counter. "For the coffee," she said. Agnes looked at the pennies. "Keep them," she said. "You need them more than I do." She paused. "Come back tonight if it doesn't work out. I've got a room I can offer for 2 nights. After that, we'd have to figure something out." "Thank you," Clara said. Agnes looked at Lily. "You want a piece of cornbread before you go, sweetheart?" Lily looked up at Clara. Clara nodded once. Lily looked back at Agnes and said in a voice that was barely above a whisper, "Yes, please." Agnes disappeared into the back and came out with cornbread and a piece for Tommy as well, who took it with the careful, controlled gratitude of a boy who was very hungry and very determined not to show it. Clara watched her son eat and felt the particular grief of a mother who had gotten her child to hungry before she found the next meal, and she stored it in the place where she kept things that made her move faster. They found Hal Brixton at the livery, same as Agnes said. He was loading the back of a wagon with the focused efficiency of a man who had learned to work around a limitation without making a performance of it. Lifting with his right, steadying with the left, where he could, compensating in small automatic ways that said the adjustment had become habit. Clara noticed, because she noticed things. She filed it away. He was not what she had expected, though she hadn't expected anything specifically. He was big in the way that ranchers were big, not showily, just structurally built for work. His face had been made and remade by weather, and something harder than weather. He looked like a man who had been asked difficult questions by the world, and had given honest answers, and found that honesty cost more than most people were willing to pay. He looked up when they stopped at the edge of the livery. He looked at Clara. He looked at Tommy. He looked at Lily. He did not look away the way most people had today, evaluating and dismissing in a single glance. He just looked level and still with the kind of patience that didn't come from ease, but from choice. "Mr. Brixton," Clara said. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was low and even, and didn't spend itself on extra words. "Agnes Fuller said you might be looking for help." He straightened. He did not look pleased or displeased. He looked like a man processing information before committing to a response. "Agnes talks," he said. "She does?" Clara agreed. "She also told me you're the one man in this county who doesn't do what Emmett Doyle tells him. I'm finding that qualification more relevant than most right now." Something moved across his face. Not quite a reaction. More like a door opening a fraction of an inch. "Doyle find you already. On the street," she said. "Inside of 2 hours." Hal's jaw tightened slightly. He looked past her toward the main street, then back. "What did he want?" "To move me to the Alderson place," she said. "He called it an appropriate arrangement." "And you said no." He was quiet for a moment. He looked at Tommy again, who was looking back at him with the flat, measuring stare of a boy who had already decided that most adults were not worth the trouble of trusting and was waiting to be proven wrong. Hal seemed to register this without offense. "What's your name, son?" Tommy considered not answering. Then he said, "Tommy." "And the little one?" "Lily," Clara said, because Lily wasn't going to say it herself. Hal nodded. He looked at Clara. "I need a cook and someone to keep the house. Garden's been ignored since May. I've got chickens, 2 cows, fencing that needs checking before the weather turns. I can't do all of it right now." He lifted his left hand slightly, just enough. Just the minimal gesture of a man who did not want sympathy, but recognized that information was practical. $1.50 a week. Bunkhouse for you and the children. Meals from the house kitchen. Clara looked at him. $1.50 is not a wage, she said. It's a courtesy. It's what I can do right now, he said. No apology in it. Just the plain economics of a man who was being honest about his margins. $2, she said. I work fast. I don't complain. And whatever you need done that isn't cooking and cleaning, I'll do it without being asked twice, and I'll do it right. He looked at her for a long moment. You negotiate like someone who's been on the wrong side of a bad agreement. I negotiate like someone who learned what happens when you don't, she said. Something near the corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. The territory just before a smile. Fair enough, he said. I want it understood I'm an employee, she said. My children and I have our own space. You don't interfere with how I raise them. Wasn't planning to, he said. And if it doesn't work, 2 weeks' notice from either of us. I need time to find something else if it comes to that. Same, he said. I won't leave you without warning. She looked at him for a moment longer. She was not a woman who trusted quickly. She had not always been that way, but she was now, and she did not apologize for it. She looked at his eyes, gray steady, no performance in them, and she made her assessment. When do you leave? She asked. 20 minutes, he said. We'll be ready, she said. He turned back to the wagon without waiting for her to thank him. She didn't thank him. That felt right, like they both understood that what was happening here was a transaction, not a rescue, and that the difference mattered. Tommy moved up beside her. Are we going? He said. We're going, she said. With him? She looked at Hal Brixton, loading the last of the supplies with the practiced, unhurried movement of a man who had been working alone for a long time and had made his peace with it. With him, she said. Lily had her hand in Clara's again, and Clara felt her daughter's fingers tighten once, not in fear exactly, but in the particular way of a child trying to hold on to a moment before it changed. Clara squeezed back. She picked up her end of the trunk. Tommy, she said. He grabbed the other end. He was already walking toward the wagon. She followed, and she did not allow herself to think about how close the edge had been today. How many doors had closed, how many assessments had been made about her worth and her children's worth by people who hadn't known her name until this morning. She didn't allow it, because there was work to do, and a wagon to load, and 20 minutes before it left. She thought about Doyle, about the way he'd said her name before she'd given it, about the paper he'd offered, about Agnes's voice when she said the Alderson place, the specific flatness of it, the thing she hadn't said underneath the thing she had. She thought about a man who had been running a ranch alone for 3 years with a bad hand and no help, and who had not in 6 years done a single thing Emmett Doyle asked him to do. That was a particular kind of man. She had not met many of them. The wagon was ready in less than 20 minutes. Hal came around and lifted Lily up onto the wagon bed without ceremony, set her down among the supply sacks, and handed Tommy up after her. He didn't help Clara. She climbed up herself. He came around to the front and took the reins and looked at her once, a brief sidelong look that said nothing in particular and somehow said enough. They pulled out of Sweetwater Junction, heading north as the late afternoon light stretched long and gold across the dry grass, and the distant mountains held the sky up at the edge of the world. Clara sat on the wagon board with the town behind her and the unknown ahead, and her children quiet in the wagon bed, and she breathed. Not the controlled breath she used when she needed to appear steady. A real one. The kind that came when the worst hour of the day was finally behind her. How long you been on your own? Hal asked after a mile of silence. 8 months, she said. He nodded once. Didn't say he was sorry. She appreciated that. You? She asked. 3 years, he said. Since my last hand left. Why'd he leave? A beat of silence. Said the work was fine. He looked at the road ahead. Said the company was lacking. From the wagon bed, Tommy made a sound that might have been a laugh. Hal glanced back. The corner of his mouth moved. Clara looked out at the land opening up around them, enormous and indifferent and absolutely silent under the late August sky. She thought about what Agnes had said. He's not an easy man. She thought about what she had said back. I'm not looking for easy. She'd meant it. The ranch came up out of the evening light slow, a main house, low and solid, a barn, a chicken coop, a bunkhouse, set apart with a rusted stovepipe on the roof. A kitchen garden gone half wild with neglect, but still alive under the weeds. Fence line that needed work. 2 horses in a pen that watched the wagon come in with the patient indifference of animals who had stopped expecting things to surprise them. It wasn't much. It was standing. It was real. It was dry. Hal pulled the wagon up and set the brake. He climbed down. He came around to the back and lifted Lily down without being asked, set her on the ground, and then looked at Tommy with the same directness he'd used at the livery. Other end of the trunk, he said. Can you manage? Tommy grabbed the handle. Yes, he said. Good, Hal said. They carried it toward the bunkhouse together, Tommy working hard to hold his end up without showing the work, Hal adjusting his grip without making a point of it. Clara watched from the doorway. Lily pressed against her legs. There was something tightening in her throat that she swallowed back down, and she was grateful her face was in the shadow. The bunkhouse was 2 rooms. A main room with a stove and a table and 2 cots against the wall. A smaller room beyond with a 3rd cot and pegs on the wall for clothes. The floor was old, but swept. The stove was cold, but there was wood stacked beside it and tinder in a tin can. It's not much, Hal said from the doorway. He stood with the evening behind him like he wasn't sure if he should come in. It's more than I had this morning, Clara said. She crouched at the stove and laid a fire. Her hands knew the work. 3 minutes and it was lit. When she stood and turned around, Hal was still in the doorway, and Lily was looking at him. Not at the floor, not at Clara's coat, at him, at his left hand specifically, with the careful, unsentimental curiosity of a 7-year-old encountering a thing she hadn't seen before. Hal noticed. He didn't hide the hand or make anything of it. He just stood still and let her look. Lily looked up at his face. Then she turned away and went to sit on the nearer cot, pulling her small boots off one at a time. Hal looked at Clara. Clara looked back at him. Neither of them said anything. I'll bring supper over in an hour, he said. He pulled the door shut behind him. His boots were quiet in the dry grass going back toward the main house. Clara stood in the middle of the room with the fire beginning to take and her children settling around her, and a sound in the air she took a moment to identify. It was quiet. Not the hollow kind, not the silence of an empty house in Billings with the creditors' notices on the table and the children asleep and nobody left to be strong for. This was different. Quieter than that. Warmer at the edges. Something that was beginning slowly to feel like shelter. Tommy sat on the second cot and started pulling off his boots. He's strange, he said. He lives alone, Clara said. That does things to people. His hand. Tommy. He went quiet. She hung her coat to dry and turned to the trunk and started sorting what needed sorting. He lifted your end of the trunk and didn't say a word about it. Remember that. She didn't say it out loud. She said it to herself, where it would keep. Lily had curled onto the cot nearest the stove knees to her chest, watching the small glass window in the stove door where the fire had gone orange. She looked smaller than she was. She'd looked smaller than she was for most of the last 8 months, like some part of her had decided that taking up less space might make the world leave her alone. Clara sat beside her and put her arm around her. Lily leaned in. "You're all right," Clara said softly. "We're all right." She didn't know yet if it was true, but she'd learned that you said it anyway. You said it until the saying became a kind of ground you could stand on even when what was underneath it was still uncertain. You said it because your children were listening, and because what they heard from you in the dark became what they told themselves later when you weren't there. Outside, across the yard, a lamp came on in the main house. And somewhere down the road, she'd come in on a town full of closed doors, was settling into its evening, and a judge in a good suit was sitting behind his desk, thinking about a widow who had said no to him on the street, and about a rancher who had not done what Doyle asked in 6 years, and about what those two things together might mean for the arrangements he had spent a long time building. He was not wrong to think about it. That was the thing about Emmett Doyle. He was never wrong about the threat. He was only ever wrong about whether it would stop him. Hal brought supper at exactly the hour he had said. Beans and salt pork and cornbread and a pot of coffee. He set it on the table and started to leave. "Mr. Brixton," Clara said. He stopped. "Thank you," she said, "for stopping today, in town. You didn't have to." He turned enough that she could see his profile. "No," he said. "I didn't." There was something in his voice she couldn't read. Not regret, not calculation. Honesty, the plain kind that didn't dress itself up. "What made you?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. The lamp put a long shadow across the floor between them. "Your boy," he said. "When I rode past, he looked up at me, and he didn't flinch." He paused. "Most children, they look away or they look scared. He just looked straight at me." Another pause. "Reminded me what it looked like when someone was still fighting." He pulled the door open. "Eat before it goes cold," he said. "Weather's clear tomorrow. We'll see what needs doing in the light." He closed the door. Clara stood for a moment. Then she sat down and served her children supper. Real supper. Hot supper. More than enough of it. And she watched them eat with the concentrated private joy of children who had been hungry long enough to know the difference. And she let herself eat too slow steady without guilt for needing it. She held her coffee cup in both hands and felt the warmth move through her palms. She thought about the town that had bolted its doors against her. She thought about Doyle on the street with his prepared smile and her name already in his mouth. She thought about every closed door and the thing behind each one, not cruelty, exactly just the comfortable indifference of people who had what they needed and had stopped imagining what it cost to be without it. Then she looked at the table in front of her, the food on it, the fire in the stove, the door that had been left unlocked. She reached out and smoothed a cornbread crumb off the wood with the edge of her hand. Not worth nothing, she thought. Not yet. Not ever. Not if she had anything to say about it. And she did. She always had. That was the one thing they had never managed to take from her. Not the creditors, not the pneumonia, not 8 months of closed doors and careful killing pity. She had plenty to say. She was just waiting for the right moment. Across the yard, the lamp in the main house burned steady and low. And whoever was inside had not gone to sleep yet, and maybe wasn't planning to sitting alone with the kind of thoughts that came when you had done something that surprised you and were still deciding what it meant. Clara poured herself a second cup of coffee and let her children settle toward sleep, and listened to the particular silence of a place that was beginning for the first time in a long time to feel like it might be able to hold them. Clara was up before the sun. She dressed in the dark, tied her hair back, laced her boots, and was out the bunkhouse door and moving across the yard, while the sky was still the color of a bruise healing at the edges. The ground was dry and hard under her feet, and the chickens heard her coming before she reached the coop and started making the particular noise of animals who had learned that morning meant someone was finally paying attention to them. 6 hens. One rooster, who came at her ankle the moment she stepped inside, like he'd been waiting all night for the opportunity. She blocked him with her knee matter-of-fact and kept working. He tried again. She blocked him again. He retreated to the far corner and watched her with the offended dignity of a creature that had never once considered it might not win. She came back across the yard with 8 eggs and found Hal standing on the porch of the main house, looking at her like she was something he hadn't calculated for. "What time did you get up?" he said. "Early enough," she said. "You got flour in that kitchen?" He blinked. "I do." "Then get out of my way," she said. He got out of her way. The kitchen was functional and catastrophically disorganized in the specific way of a man who had stopped seeing the disorder because he'd been inside it too long. Tools on the eating table, a bridle hanging off a chairback, 2 months of unopened mail in a pile next to the coffee tin, a cast-iron pan that hadn't been properly seasoned in what looked like at least a year. Clara put the eggs down, found the flour, found the lard, found a bowl that was clean enough and had biscuits in the oven and coffee on the stove before Hal had finished washing up at the pump outside. He came in and stopped in the middle of the kitchen and looked around at what had changed in 20 minutes. "I moved some things," Clara said. "I can put them back if you tell me where they go." He looked at the table clear now and set with 2 plates. He looked at the bridle, which was now hanging on a peg near the back door. He looked at the mail, which was in a neat stack on the shelf, weighted down with a coffee cup. "It's not wrong," he said. "Sit down then," she said. "Biscuits need a few more minutes." He sat. He watched her move around his kitchen, the way she'd watched him load the wagon the day before, not intrusively, just taking inventory, filing things away. "Tommy still asleep?" he asked. "Another 20 minutes probably. Lily wakes when Tommy wakes." He turned the coffee cup in his good hand. "She always that quiet." Clara set a cup in front of him without answering right away. She poured her own. She sat down across from him with the table between them, which felt right. Safe distances were just practical sense, and she had learned the hard way that dismantling them too fast was its own kind of damage. "She talked plenty before," Clara said. "She'll talk again when she's ready." "I'm not asking because it bothers me," he said. "I'm asking because I want to know how to be around her, what helps, what doesn't." Clara looked at him across the table. That was not the question she'd expected. She'd expected patience at best. The careful neutrality of a man who had agreed to house children and was now hoping they would require as little of him as possible. "Don't pretend she's not there," Clara said. "That's what most people do. They look past her talk around her, treat her like a problem to manage until she goes back to normal. She notices." She paused. "Just talk to her like a person. Don't wait for her to answer. She's listening even when she isn't responding." He nodded once, like it was useful information, and he intended to use it. The biscuits came out right. She put 4 on the table, and the smell of them in that early morning kitchen was something close to civilization, the kind that had nothing to do with refinement and everything to do with warmth and enough. Hal ate 1 in 2 bites. He chewed. He looked at the table. Then he said, "Those are good, sir." "I know," she said. Something shifted in his face. Not quite a smile, but the shape of one, the negative space where a smile would go in a man who had gotten out of the habit. The morning's work was harder than the evening had suggested. The kitchen garden was a disaster. 2 months of unchecked growth had let the weeds establish themselves like they owned the property, which practically they did. Clara got down on her knees in the dirt between the rows and started pulling systematic working from the near end toward the far fence. Pete appeared beside her 20 minutes later, still chewing the last of his breakfast biscuit. "What do I do?" he asked. "Pull what isn't supposed to be there," she said. "How do I know what's supposed to be there?" "If it looks rough and mean and like it grew without anyone's permission," she said, "it's a weed." Tommy considered that for a moment. "Sounds like some people I know." "Pull those 3, she said. He laughed a quick, surprised sound like it got out before he could decide not to, and got down in the dirt beside her and started pulling. They worked alongside each other in the way they'd learned in the months since Daniel died, without a lot of talking, but not without communication, either passing things back and forth, adjusting to each other's rhythm. Hal came to the garden fence around mid-morning and looked at the progress. "You don't have to do that today," he said. "I know," Clara said. "I mean it. You just got here." She sat back on her heels and looked up at him. "Mr. Brixton, how far behind are you on this garden?" He thought about it honestly. "Far," he said. "Then I'm doing it today." She went back to pulling. "You want to help, there's space." He was quiet for a moment. Then she heard him go to the barn and come back. And then he was on the other side of the fence, working in long, efficient strokes, and Lily was sitting on the top rail, watching him the way she watched everything she hadn't decided about yet, still and careful, and taking it all in. He worked for a while without speaking. Then he said, not looking at Lily, but clearly talking to her, "You know what this is?" He held up what he'd just pulled. Lily looked at it. "Pigweed," he said. "Grows everywhere. Doesn't ask permission. Crowds out everything else. Nothing useful about it unless you're a pig." He dropped it in the pile. "Some plants are like some people. All spread no purpose." He pulled another one. Then he reached for something else, something greener, and held it up separately. "Now this here is different. Lamb's quarters. You can eat it. Most people pull it because it looks like a weed. It isn't." He set it aside in a small pile. "Worth knowing the difference." Lily reached out from the fence rail and picked up one of the lamb's quarters. She turned it over in her fingers. Hal went back to work. Didn't push it. Didn't look at her again. Clara kept her head down and her hands moving and her face pointed at the garden bed. It was a small thing. It was not a small thing at all. By noon the garden was cleared and turned, and Clara had identified 6 things still growing worth keeping, and 3 beds that needed reseeding before September was out. She told Hal over the fence. He said there was a seed tin in the barn bottom shelf right side. She found it. She also found that the barn had not been properly organized in what looked like over a year, that one of the stall boards was cracked and needed replacing, and that someone had left a perfectly good set of leather-working tools rusting in the corner behind a broken saddle. She brought the saddle to Hal's attention at supper that evening. He looked at her. "I know about the saddle," he said. "It's repairable," she said. "So is the bridle beside it. I can do it, but I'll need oil and a proper rag." "Cabinet in the tack room," he said. "Left side. I'll do it tomorrow." He put his fork down slowly. "Mrs. Dunbar," he said, "I hired you to cook and clean." "I understand that," she said. "I also understand a working ranch runs on details, and you're behind on about 40 of them." She met his eyes. "I told you I work fast. I wasn't being modest." Tommy looked between the two of them with the focused attention of a 10-year-old watching something he wanted to understand. Hal picked his fork back up. "Fair enough," he said. It was the second time he'd said that to her in 2 days, and both times it had meant something different. The first time at the wagon it had been a concession. This time it was something closer to respect. She filed that away. She was washing the supper dishes when she heard the sound outside boots on the porch step, a knock that was too deliberate to be casual. Not Hal's knock. She'd only heard Hal knock once the night before, and she'd already filed away that it was different from this. This knock expected something. She opened the door. The man on the porch was not anyone she recognized. He was in his late 30s, lean with a deputy's badge and eyes that did a quick inventory of the room behind her before they settled on her face. "Mrs. Dunbar," he said. Not a greeting, a confirmation. "That's right," she said. She did not step back from the door. "Sheriff Curtis Wade sends his regards," the man said. "And Judge Doyle asks if you might have reconsidered the position at the Alderson place, given your circumstances." "My circumstances haven't changed since yesterday," Clara said. Neither has my answer. The deputy looked at her, the way men looked at women who were giving them more resistance than they'd planned for. The judge is a man of considerable patience, he said, but he does like things settled. So do I, Clara said. Tell him I'm settled. Ma'am. Tell him I'm employed, she said. Legally at this address under agreed terms. And if he has any further questions about my status in this county, he can put them in writing and I'll respond in kind. The deputy was quiet for a moment. He looked past her again into the kitchen, as if he was checking to confirm something. Whatever he was looking for, he didn't show whether he found it. Good evening, Mrs. Dunbar, he said. Good evening, she said, and closed the door. She stood with her back against it and heard his horse move away down the road. Then she went out the back and walked to the barn. Hal was inside working by lantern light. He looked up when she came in, read her face in one look. Who was it? She told him. All of it start to finish. She described the deputy, the phrasing the way his eyes had moved around the room behind her, like he was taking inventory. She told it plainly, because he needed facts, not feelings. And she had learned not to waste a person's time with one, when the other was what the situation required. Hal set down his tools. He was quiet for a moment. He's telling you he's still watching, he said. The deputy, the courtesy visit. It's Doyle's method. He doesn't push all at once. He applies pressure in small doses until people get tired and move on their own. Has it worked? She asked. Hal's jaw moved. Mostly, he said. Who hasn't moved? He looked at her. Something in his face shifted, not suspicion assessment. The careful measuring look of a man deciding how much to say. Agnes Fuller, he said finally. She's been here 22 years. She's the one person in this county that Doyle hasn't been able to touch directly. He paused. He wants her building, prime location. His son-in-law has plans for a hotel. She knows it. She's been holding on, but it costs her. What does Doyle have on her? Clara asked. Nothing, Hal said. That's the problem. Her deed is clean. Her title is clean. So he's been working the edges. Complaints, inspections, rumors. He looked at the lantern. Last year, someone started a story that her boarding house was running something other than a boarding house. She proved it wasn't true. But it cost her 3 long-term guests before it was settled. Clara was quiet for a moment. How long have you been watching him? She asked. Hal's hands went still on the workbench. He didn't answer right away. Long enough to know the pattern, he said. I've been keeping notes. Names, dates, what he filed, what actually happened. Families he's moved off their land. Technicalities he manufactured. Claims he processed that should never have been processed. He looked at his left hand, his kid. I had a neighbor 2 years ago. Good man. Family'd been on their land for 15 years. Doyle found a gap in the original deed language, filed a challenge on behalf of a developer from Chicago who wanted the water access. Gave the family 60 days to respond with documentation they couldn't produce in a form the court would accept. He stopped. What happened to them? Clara asked. Sold for pennies and moved north, he said. The boy was about Tommy's age. He said it flat the way a person spoke about something they'd already judged themselves on and didn't need to revisit. I helped them load the wagon. The boy kept asking me if it was really true they had to go. Kept asking like he thought I'd tell him something different. He picked up the tool he'd set down, turned it in his good hand. I didn't have a different answer for him. Clara stood in the barn and listened to the lantern and thought about every family behind every closed door that never opened again. She thought about Doyle on the street with her name already in his mouth. She thought about a deputy who'd come to the door of a woman who'd been in the county for 1 day to check whether she'd changed her mind about moving. He's not going to stop, she said. No, Hal said. He's not. The territorial legislature seat opens up this fall. He's been building toward it for 2 years. Needs to show voters he's a man of order, a widow arriving with children and debt history and no established residency. He looked at her. You're a problem he can solve publicly. She felt the cold move through her. Not panic. She was past panic. It had burned through her somewhere around month 3 of the last 8 months, and what was left behind was harder and more useful. Just the clear-eyed arithmetic of what she was dealing with added up and laid out. "He can't take my children," she said. "Not without cause," Hal said. "But Doyle is good at manufacturing cause." "Then we don't give him any." The words came out flat and certain. "What does that look like practically?" He turned to face her. His hands were at his sides. He looked like a man deciding how honest to be and then deciding to be completely honest. "You stay documented. Employment address clean record. No debt in this county, no complaint filed against you. No reason for him to come back here with another form." He paused. "And you don't go to town alone. Not because you can't handle yourself." "I can handle myself," she said. "I know that," he said. "That's not what I mean. The point is, there needs to be no opportunity for someone to say something to you in public and have no witness to it. Doyle uses words like weapons, and he never carries them himself. He has other people do it." She thought about the deputy at the door. She thought about the careful, pleasant delivery of a message that was not pleasant at all. "He already has people in place," she said. "He's had 6 years to build," Hal said. He held her gaze. "How do you know I'm not one of them?" She looked at him steadily. "Agnes Fuller told me you were the one man in this county who hasn't done what Doyle asked," she said. "And Doyle sent a deputy to my door the same evening I arrived at your property. If you were one of his, he'd already know everything he needed to know, and he wouldn't need to send anyone." She paused. "He's sending people because he doesn't know what's happening out here. That tells me you're not his." Hal looked at her for a long moment. Something moved in his face that she hadn't seen there before. Not warmth exactly. Something that came just before warmth, the space where warmth could go if a person let it. "You think fast," he said. "I've had practice," she said. She turned toward the barn door. "I need to get back to my children." "Mrs. Dunbar." She stopped. "You handled the deputy right," he said. "At the door. You didn't give him anything." She looked back at him. "I noticed he already knew my name when he got to town. Someone in Billings told someone here about me before I even stepped off the stage." She paused. "That's not a coincidence." He held her gaze. "No," he said. "It isn't." "Then we should probably talk about who," she said. "Tomorrow, if you're willing." "Tomorrow," he agreed. She walked back to the bunkhouse across the dark yard and went in quietly and checked her children without waking them. Tommy was flat on his back, with one arm thrown over his eyes the way he always slept when he was deeply out the way he hadn't slept in months. Lily had curled on her side with her knees pulled up, and the lamb's quarters Hal had given her sitting on the floor beside the cot. She'd brought it inside. She'd kept it. Clara sat on the edge of her own cot for a long time and did not let herself think past tomorrow, because she had learned that thinking past tomorrow was its own kind of damage when tomorrow was the thing you couldn't guarantee. She thought about Hal Brixton in his barn alone for 3 years, keeping notes on a man no one would listen about with no one to listen to him do it. She thought about what it cost to watch something wrong happen over and over and keep writing it down in a ledger that no one was reading. She thought about the particular loneliness of a person who knew what was right and couldn't make it matter. She recognized it. She'd been living next door to that feeling for 8 months. Outside the main house lamp burned until well past midnight, the way it had the night before, steady and low in the window, the light of someone who had decided tonight was not a night for sleeping. Clara lay on her cot and listened to the quiet of the ranch and felt her children breathing, and thought about the deputy's eyes moving around her kitchen like he was taking inventory of everything she had, which was not much, which was also not nothing. She had 22 cents when she stepped off that stage. She had employment now, and a roof, and a man who'd said fair enough to every reasonable thing she'd asked, and had come to the garden fence that morning and told her daughter the difference between a weed and something worth keeping. She had been given worse odds before. She closed her eyes and let herself think about one thing, only the thing she always kept for last before sleep, because it steadied her. She had gotten her children through today, both of them safe and fed and dry, with the particular relief of people who had been cold enough long enough to understand what warmth cost. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, everything. She turned onto her side and closed her eyes and let the dark ranch go quiet around her, and she did not think about Doyle or the deputy or the notes in Hal's ledger or the 6 years of a man building something wrong and careful and hard in this county while everyone else got tired and moved on. She thought about Lily's hand reaching out for a plant that looked like a weed but wasn't. And she let herself sleep. She went to town for supplies 3 days after she arrived, not because she wanted to, but because the ranch needed flour and salt and lamp oil, and wanting had nothing to do with what needed doing. She told Hal at breakfast. He looked up from his coffee and said he'd come with her. "I don't need an escort," she said. "I know that," he said. "I need nails and a new draw knife, and I've been putting it off for 2 weeks. He looked at her evenly. "We're going to the same place." She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "Fine." Tommy wanted to come. She said yes, because Tommy had been coiled tight for 3 days and needed the motion, and because she understood now what Hal had said about witnesses. Lily stayed at the ranch. Not because Clara asked her to, but because Lily had spent most of the last 2 mornings at the horse pen, watching the 2 ranch horses move in slow circles. And when Clara had said the word town, Lily had looked at the horses and then back at Clara, and the answer was in her face before she said anything. "Can I stay?" Lily asked. "Stay close to the yard," Clara said. "Don't go past the fence line." Lily was already pulling on her boots. The road into Sweetwater Junction had dried hard in the August heat, and the wagon moved faster than it had the day of her arrival. Tommy sat between Clara and Hal on the board, and divided his attention between the road ahead and Hal's hands on the reins, studying the way Hal managed with the left, the small compensations, the adjustments so habitual, they'd stopped being adjustments and become just the way the thing was done. After a mile of this, Tommy said, "How'd you hurt your hand?" Clara said, "Tommy." "It's all right," Hal said. He didn't look at Tommy when he said it. He kept his eyes on the road. "Line of work I was in." "What kind of work?" "Investigations," Hal said. "For a private company." Tommy thought about that. "Like a detective." "Something like that." "What happened?" Hal was quiet for long enough that Tommy had started to look away, accepting the silence as a closed door. Then Hal said, "Got between 2 men who both thought they were right. Turned out one of them had a faster answer than I did." He flexed the left hand once, a small reflexive movement. "Learned something from it." "What?" Tommy asked. "That being right doesn't make you fast," Hal said. "And fast doesn't make you right. You need both, or you've got nothing." Tommy turned that over quietly. Clara watched her son think and said nothing. She had learned that Tommy processed things better when adults didn't rush him toward the conclusion. After another mile, Tommy said, "My dad was right about a lot of things, and it still didn't help him." Hal didn't say he was sorry. He didn't say things work out, or that Daniel was in a better place, or any of the other careful phrases people had been delivering to Clara's children for 8 months, like packages left on a doorstep. He just said, "What was he right about?" Tommy looked at his hands. He said a man's word was worth more than his contract, that if you had to write it down to make someone keep it, you'd already lost something. He paused. He shook hands on a supply deal with a man in Billings, and the man took the money and didn't deliver, and there wasn't any paper to prove it, and we lost everything we'd put in. He stopped. "He was right about how things should be," Hal said. "He just ran into how things are." "Yeah," Tommy said. He looked out at the road. "I think about that a lot." "Means you're paying attention," Hal said. Tommy looked up at him sideways, the guarded look he gave things he hadn't decided about yet. but something in it was fractionally less guarded than it had been the day before. Clara noticed. She looked at the road ahead and said nothing. The main street of Sweetwater Junction was busy in the mid-morning heat. Wagons, horses, women with baskets, men moving between buildings with the purposeful expressions of people who had places to be and business to conduct. Several of them slowed when the Brixton wagon came down the street. Several of them looked at Clara and then at Hal, and then at each other, with the particular quality of small-town attention that was never quite looking and never quite not. Tommy noticed it. He sat up straighter without being told. Garrett's General Store was the first stop. The heavy-set man behind the counter looked up when they came in, processed Hal's presence, and his manner changed in the small, immediate way that said Hal Brixton meant something in this town, even if he didn't spend it often. He filled Clara's order without comment, priced it fairly, and kept whatever he thought about the arrangement to himself. They were nearly done when the bell above the door rang, and a woman came in that Clara had not seen before. She was in her mid-40s, well-dressed by local standards, with the particular posture of a woman who had decided a long time ago that how she carried herself was a form of argument. She went still when she saw Clara at the counter. "Hal," she said. Her eyes were on Clara. "Margaret," Hal said. Margaret Doyle and Clara knew before anyone said the name knew from the way the woman's eyes moved over her with the assessing proprietary attention of someone who considered this county a known quantity, and Clara a disruption of it. She was Doyle's daughter. Clara filed it away. "I didn't know you'd taken on help," Margaret said to Hal pleasantly. "Mrs. Dunbar is employed at my ranch," Hal said. His voice was even. "She's picking up supplies." "Of course." Margaret turned her attention fully to Clara, and the pleasantness in her face was the careful kind, the kind that had been maintained through practice so long, it sat naturally on top of whatever was actually underneath. "Mrs. Dunbar, I've heard about you." "I'd imagine so," Clara said. "My father-in-law mentioned you'd arrived. He was quite concerned." She touched a bolt of fabric on the counter beside her, not looking at it. "A woman alone with children new to the county. He likes to make sure everyone gets a proper start." "He's been very attentive," Clara said. Margaret's eyes moved to Tommy. Tommy was standing beside Clara with his hands loose at his sides and his face completely still, the controlled expression of a boy who had learned to make himself unreadable when adults were doing something he didn't trust. "What a serious young man," Margaret said. "He's 10, Clara said. "He's allowed to be serious." Something tightened behind Margaret's eyes, quick and small and gone. "Of course." She looked back at Clara. "I did want to say there's a ladies' social Thursday evening at the church hall. It would be a lovely opportunity for you to meet people properly, get established in the community." She smiled. "It's important to have the right connections in a town like this." "Thank you," Clara said. "I'll think about it." Garrett set the last of the supplies on the counter. Clara counted out the money from the folded bills Hal had given her and laid it down exact. She lifted the box. Tommy took one side without being asked. "Mrs. Dunbar," Margaret said as Clara moved toward the door. Not loudly, just at a volume calculated to be heard clearly by everyone in the room. "I hope you'll consider what's best for your children. A temporary arrangement on a working ranch is one thing. A stable situation with proper prospects is another." She paused. "My father-in-law's offer still stands. The Aldersons are a very well-regarded family." Clara stopped. She set the box back on the counter. She turned around. "Mrs. Doyle," she said. Her voice was the kind of level that had weight in it rather than volume. "I appreciate that you've dressed this up as concern. You've done it well, but I've been employed by Mr. Brixton. For 4 days, I've been in this county for 1 week, and your family has sent a courtesy visit, a deputy, and now a personal conversation in a public place." She looked at the woman directly. "I'm starting to wonder what exactly it is about one widow with 2 children that requires this much of your father-in-law's attention." The room was very quiet. Garrett was studying a point on the back wall with intense concentration. The two other people in the store were not moving. Margaret's pleasant expression had not disappeared. That was the frightening part of it held, but the warmth behind it had gone completely, and what was left was just the shape of a smile on a face that was calculating. "You're very forthright for a woman in your position," she said. "And you've given me your father-in-law's message very clearly," Clara said. "Tell him I received it." She picked up the box. Tommy already had his end. They walked out. On the boardwalk, Tommy let out a breath. "She didn't like that," he said. "No," Clara said. "Was that smart? Saying it like that in front of everyone?" "Probably not the cautious thing," Clara said. "But there were 4 people in that room who will repeat exactly what happened in that conversation by this evening. And now, every one of them knows that I know what's being done." She stepped off the boardwalk toward the wagon. Doyle operates best when people are too afraid or too confused to name what they're seeing. Once you name it out loud in public, it changes the shape of it. Tommy was quiet for a moment. "Dad used to say sunlight was the best disinfectant." "Your dad was right about more things than that supply deal cost him credit for," Clara said. Tommy almost smiled. He loaded the box into the wagon without another word, but the set of his shoulders had changed. The braced quality was still there, but there was something alongside it now, something that looked like it might eventually become steadiness rather than tension. Clara noticed it the way she noticed everything that changed in her children. The small recalibrations that were the only evidence of whether things were getting better or worse. Hal was at the hardware when they found him coming out with nails and a draw knife and a roll of wire. He looked at Clara's face and then at Tommy's and read them both in the single quick assessment of a man who had spent years interpreting situations before they became emergencies. "Margaret Doyle was in the store," Clara said. He looked at her. "What happened?" "I said something in front of 4 people that she'll report back to her father-in-law by sundown," Clara said. "I named what was being done, publicly." Hal was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "He won't like that." "No," Clara said. "But now there are witnesses to the fact that it's happening, which makes it harder for him to pretend it isn't." He put the supplies in the back of the wagon. He stood for a moment with his hand on the sideboard. "It'll speed things up," he said. "His timeline." "Then we move faster than his timeline," she said. He looked at her with that expression she'd catalogued, but not yet fully translated, the one that appeared when she said something he hadn't planned for, but found he had no argument against. "There's something you need to know," he said, "about Agnes Fuller." "Tell me," she said. "Not here," he said. "Tonight." They drove back to the ranch in the late morning heat, and Tommy rode the whole way, thinking about something he didn't share, and Clara let him think. That was the most useful thing she'd learned about her son in the last 8 months he processed in private, and came out the other side with whatever he'd worked out, and interrupting that process was worse than waiting. Lily was at the horse pen when they pulled into the yard. She turned when she heard the wagon and watched them come in with the focused attention she gave everything she was paying real interest to. On the top rail of the fence beside her was a small wreath of something woven together: lamb's quarters and dried grass, and 2 small yellow flowers from somewhere near the garden. She had made it while they were gone. Clara climbed down from the wagon and walked to the fence. She looked at the wreath. "Did you make that?" she asked. Lily picked it up and held it out. Clara took it. It was small and imperfect and completely intentional. She turned it over in her hands. "It's beautiful," she said. Lily looked at the horses. "The gray one let me touch her nose," she said. Clara looked up. "Did she?" "She didn't move away," Lily said. "I stood still like Mr. Brixton said, and she came over herself." Clara heard Hal's boots in the dirt behind her. She didn't turn around. She just held the wreath in her hands and kept her face pointed at the fence and breathed through the thing that was happening in her chest. "That's the right way," Hal said from behind her. Not to Clara, to Lily. "You remember what I said about that?" "Stop chasing," Lily said. "Stand still. They always come." Every time, he said. After supper that evening, after the children were settled, Clara went to the main house and knocked. Hal opened the door and stepped back, and she came in and sat at the kitchen table, and he sat across from her with a ledger between them and the lamp burning low. Agnes Fuller, he said. She's been in Sweetwater Junction for 22 years. Came here with her husband who died the second winter. Built the boarding house herself, room by room, over 5 years. He opened the ledger to a page near the back. Doyle has been trying to move her out for 3 years. His son has plans for that corner lot hotel saloon investors from back east. Agnes's deed is clean. He can't touch her directly. So he works the edges, Clara said. He works the edges, Hal agreed. But there's something else. Something I think she has on him. I can't prove it yet. He turned the page. 15 years ago, before Doyle was on the bench, there was a family outside of town, Lakota. They'd been on a particular piece of land for over a generation, and there was a formal arrangement, not a deed the American court would recognize, but something documented, something real. Doyle was a land attorney then. He processed a transfer of that land to a speculator from St. Louis. He stopped. And? Clara asked. The family's representative, a man named Joseph Crane, who spoke English well enough to navigate the filing process, died on the road between here and the county seat 2 weeks after he signed the transfer paperwork. Horse through him. His voice was level, and she heard everything underneath the level. Agnes knew him, Clara said. It wasn't a question. Joseph Crane's wife was Agnes Fuller's closest friend for 12 years, Hal said. They'd been neighbors. Agnes was at that woman's house the night before Joseph rode to the county seat. She told me once, just once, that Joseph had come to her door that night and told her he was afraid. That something about the paperwork felt wrong. That he'd been pressured to sign things he hadn't had proper time to read. He looked at the ledger. She told me he asked her to remember the date. Just that. Remember the date. She's been holding that for 15 years, Clara said. She's been holding it, and she's been watching, and she's been afraid to use it because every person who's tried to stand against Doyle in this county has ended up with less than they started with. He closed the ledger. She needs someone to take it somewhere he can't reach it. Some official record, some authority outside his jurisdiction. Clara was quiet. She thought about Agnes at the boarding house counter, the direct assessing eyes of a woman who had been waiting. She thought about the way Agnes had said, "He's not an easy man," and Clara had said, "I'm not looking for easy," and something had shifted in the old woman's face. She thought about a deputy coming to her door on her first night in the county. She thought about Margaret Doyle's smile going cold in a public room. She thought about Tommy asking, "How do you know what's supposed to be there?" and the answer she'd given him without thinking. If it looks rough and mean and like it grew without anyone's permission, it's a weed. "How many families?" she asked. "That I've documented." Hal said, 11. Over 6 years. Same pattern every time. "And Joseph Crane." "He predates my records, but Agnes would know the details." He looked at her. "She's never told anyone the full story. Not in 15 years. "She'll tell me," Clara said. He looked at her. "You don't know that." "She told me to come back if the job didn't work out," Clara said. "She made cornbread for my children on the first day. She told me about you." She paused. "She's been waiting for someone to ask the right question. That's what waiting 15 years looks like, not giving up. Staying close enough to the thing that when the right moment comes, you can move." Hal was quiet for a long moment. The lamp between them burned steady and low. "She's not going to be safe once you go to her," he said. "Once she talks, Doyle will know what she has. He'll move on her." "He's already moving on her," Clara said. 3 years of inspections and rumors and filed complaints. The difference is she's been absorbing it alone." She met his eyes. "She won't be alone this time." He looked at her across the table with the particular attention she'd stopped trying to categorize the steady, patient look of a man who had been watching something reveal itself and was still discovering the full size of what it was. "You've been in this county 8 days," he said. "I know," she said. "And you're already talking about going up against a man who's had 15 years to build what he has here." "He came to my door on my 2nd day," she said. "He sent a deputy on my 3rd night. He sent his daughter-in-law to a public room to deliver a message on my 8th morning." She put her hands flat on the table. "I didn't come here looking for this, but he found me anyway, and now I know what he is, and I have 2 children sleeping 40 feet from where I'm sitting, and I am not going to close my eyes and hope he decides I'm not worth the trouble." She paused. "Because he won't. That's not who he is." Hal held her gaze. Outside, the night ranch was completely quiet. The horses were still. The land was still. "Tomorrow," he said finally, "we go see Agnes together." "Tomorrow?" Clara agreed. She stood up. She was at the door when he said her name. Not Mrs. Dunbar, just Clara. And it was the first time, and neither of them acknowledged it. But it landed differently than anything else he'd said in 8 days, with a weight and a quietness that said it had not been accidental. She turned. "You did something today," he said. "In that store, saying it out loud in front of people." He paused. "Most people don't do that. They take what's done to them privately because they're afraid of what happens when they make it public." "I know," she said. "I'm not sure they're wrong to be afraid," he said. "I want you to understand what you started today." She looked at him steadily. "I understand what it costs to stay quiet," she said. "I did it for 8 months in Billings, waiting for things to get better on their own." She reached for the door handle. They didn't. She went back across the yard to the bunkhouse and went in quietly and checked her children in the dark. Tommy on his back arm over his eyes. Lily on her side, the hairbrush Hal had given her first morning on the floor beside the cot. The small wreath of lamb's quarters on the windowsill where she'd put it before bed. Clara sat on the edge of her cot and did not let herself think about how large the thing ahead of them was. She thought about one step, one door. Agnes Fuller tomorrow, and the question that had been waiting 15 years to be asked. She lay down. She closed her eyes. Somewhere across the yard, the main house lamp went dark for the first time before midnight since she'd arrived. She noticed that. She turned it over once in the quiet, and then she let herself sleep. They left for town before the morning had fully decided what it wanted to be. The sky still gray at the edges, and the road empty in both directions. Tommy watched them go from the porch of the bunkhouse with his arms crossed and his chin up, the posture of a boy trying on the shape of someone older. Clara had told him plainly what they were doing, and why, because she had learned that Tommy handled hard information better than careful omission, and that treating him like someone who needed to be protected from the truth was its own kind of damage. "Watch your sister," she said. "I know," he said. "If anyone comes to the gate, you don't open it. You come find me." "You won't be here," he said. "Then you wait inside with the door latched, and you don't answer anyone until we're back." She held his eyes. "Can you do that?" He looked at her with the flat, serious expression he wore when he was deciding whether to argue. He decided not to. "Yes," he said. She kissed the top of his head. He didn't pull away, which told her something about where he was this morning. She went to the wagon. Hal was already on the board. He looked at her when she climbed up, read her face, and said nothing. That was one of the things she had cataloged about him in 9 days. He didn't fill silence with reassurance. He either had something useful to say, or he didn't say anything, and she had found to her own mild surprise that she trusted the silence more than she would have trusted talk. Agnes Fuller was behind the boarding house desk when they came in, sorting the week's accounts, with the focused efficiency of a woman who kept her own books and trusted no one else to do it. She looked up. She looked at Hal. She looked at Clara. She looked at the ledger under Clara's arm, which Clara had brought because it seemed wrong to ask Agnes to open something this old without showing her that someone else had already been building toward the same place. Agnes set her pen down. "Close the door," she said. Hal closed it. Agnes looked at Clara for a long moment. The morning light from the single window put her face in sharp relief, every line of it, and Clara thought she looked like a woman who had been carrying a specific weight for so long that she'd stopped noticing it, except in the mornings when she first picked it back up. "Hal told you about Joseph Crane," Agnes said. Not a question. "He told me what he knew," Clara said. "Which wasn't everything." "No," Agnes said. "It wasn't." She folded her hands on the desk in front of her. "How much do you want?" "All of it," Clara said. "Whatever you've been holding." Agnes looked at her hands. She looked at Hal. She looked at the ledger Clara set on the counter between them. She reached out and touched the cover of it, but didn't open it. "How many?" she asked. 11 families, Hal said. "That I've documented." Agnes nodded slowly, like the number confirmed something she'd already calculated. "Joseph Crane's family would have been the first," she said. "Or close to it, before Doyle had the bench, when he was still building." She took a breath that was not quite steady. "Sarah Crane was my closest friend for 12 years. We came to this territory the same year different routes ended up neighbors. Her husband Joseph was a good man. Quiet. Careful. Spoke 3 languages, which meant people underestimated him constantly, which he used when he needed to and ignored when he didn't." She stopped. Clara waited. "In the spring of 1868, Agnes said, Doyle came to the Crane family with a land transfer proposal. He represented it as a protective arrangement, a legal formalization that would secure their occupancy rights under American territorial law. He told Joseph that without this documentation, the family had no standing if the territory government decided to reassign land allocations." She paused. What he didn't tell Joseph was that the transfer document he'd drawn up conveyed the actual title to a speculator named Harold Fenn out of St. Louis. The protection was the sale. Joseph didn't know he was signing away the land. He thought he was securing it. "He found out," Clara said. "He found out 3 weeks later when a man from Fenn's office rode out and told him he had 60 days to vacate." Agnes's voice was level, and the levelness of it was the most expressive thing in the room. "Joseph came to my door that night. It was the last night I saw him. He told me he'd been to the county filing office and gotten a copy of what he'd signed, and he'd found someone who could read it properly and explain what it said." She stopped. "He was going to ride to the territorial office in the county seat the next morning. He was going to file a complaint against Doyle for fraudulent misrepresentation." The room was very quiet. "He never got there," Hal said. It was not a question. "His horse threw him on the Cutler Creek Road," Agnes said. "Broke his neck. They found him the next afternoon." She picked up her pen and set it back down without writing anything. "I went to that road the day after they brought him home. I walked the whole stretch of it. That horse had made that ride 40 times. He knew every stone of it." She looked at the wall behind Clara. Someone had strung a wire across the road at chest height for a horse. Low enough that you wouldn't see it in the early morning. High enough that when a horse hit it at speed, she stopped. Clara put her hand flat on the counter. "I cut it down myself," Agnes said. "I took it home. I still have it." She looked at Clara directly. 15 years, and I still have it, because I knew one day someone would need to see it." Hal was very still. "You never told anyone," he said. "I told Sarah," Agnes said. "Sarah believed me. And then Sarah took her children and went to live with her sister in Wyoming because she had 4 children under the age of 12 and a dead husband and a man who had just demonstrated what he was willing to do, and she didn't have a single thing left to fight with." She paused. "I stayed. I don't know exactly why I stayed. Maybe because leaving felt like letting it be the last word." "Do you still have the wire?" Clara asked. Agnes opened the drawer of the desk, reached to the very back of it, and produced a coil of thin wire wrapped in a piece of oilcloth. She set it on the counter beside the ledger. "I kept it in the barn for 10 years, she said. "Then I moved it here when Doyle started making inquiries about the building. Seemed like if something happened to the barn, I should have it somewhere else." Clara looked at the coil. She looked at Hal. He was reading the ledger entry he'd opened to his jaw, working slightly the way it did when he was taking something in that he'd been building toward for a long time. "There's something else," Agnes said. "Something I didn't tell Hal because I needed to see who came through my door before I decided whether it was safe to say." Clara looked up. Agnes reached into the desk again and produced a folded envelope worn at the creases, the kind of worn that came from being handled regularly over many years. She held it for a moment before she set it down. "Joseph left this with me the night he came to my door. He said if anything happened to him before he got to file his complaint, I should keep this until I found someone who could use it." She slid it across the counter. Clara opened it carefully. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper in close, careful handwriting. She read it. She read it again. "He made a copy," she said quietly. "Of the original transfer document," Agnes said, "before he signed it. He was a careful man. He made a copy and compared it to what Doyle gave him to sign, and he annotated the differences in the margins." She paused. "Doyle changed 3 clauses between the document he showed Joseph initially and the document he had him sign. The changes transferred the title rather than protected it. Joseph wrote out every difference, in his own hand, dated and witnessed by his wife." Clara set the paper down on the counter and put her hand over it. Her hand was steady. She was aware of that, aware of making it stay steady, aware of the cold, clear feeling in her chest that was not fear and was not anger, but was something between them that had no good name except maybe purpose. "This is evidence of fraud," she said. "Yes," Agnes said. "Combined with Hal's documentation of the pattern," Clara said, "and the wire." "It's enough to take somewhere," Agnes said. "It's enough if you can find someone it can reach who Doyle hasn't already gotten to." She looked at Hal. "That's been the problem all along, hasn't it? Not the evidence, the reach." "There's a federal land commissioner," Hal said. "His name is Arthur Webb. He's been appointed directly by Washington, not through the territorial structure. Doyle has no jurisdiction over him and no established relationship with him." He paused. "I wrote to him 6 months ago. I didn't get a response." "Did the letter go through the county post?" Clara asked. Hal looked at her. Something moved in his face. Agnes said, "All county correspondence goes through the post office in this building." She said it quietly. "Which means it goes through me." She paused. "I process incoming mail before I sort it, which means I know what comes in and I know what doesn't." She looked at Hal. "Your letter never came back through this post, Hal, which means it didn't come from Washington, which means it was intercepted before it left the county." Hal stood very still for a moment. "The outgoing mail," he said, "goes to the collection point at Garrett's store before it goes on the stage," Agnes said. "Garrett is not a bad man, but he has a son who works at Doyle's office." She folded her hands. "I'm sorry. I didn't know about your letter until after the fact. By the time I realized what had likely happened, there was nothing to do about it." "Is there another way to reach Webb?" Clara asked. "Directly," Hal said. "In person. The federal land office is in Helena." He paused. 2-day ride. The room was quiet for a moment. Then, from outside, came a sound that none of them had expected. Boots on the boarding house porch, 2 sets heavier than a guest arriving. A knock that was not a guest's knock, the deliberate, performative knock of official business. Agnes looked at the door. Her face went very still. "Don't open it yet," Clara said. She folded Joseph Crane's annotated copy and put it inside the ledger. She put the wire back in its oilcloth and slid it to Agnes, who put it back in the drawer and closed it. "Now," Clara said. Agnes went to the door and opened it. Sheriff Curtis Wade was on the porch. He was 50 and broad-shouldered, with a face that had been weathered into a kind of permanent tiredness, the look of a man who had been absorbing difficult things for a long time and had run out of places to put them. Behind him was the same deputy who had come to the ranch 3 nights ago. "Agnes," Wade said. His eyes moved past her into the room and found Hal and Clara, and registered them both with an expression that was not surprise. "Curtis," Agnes said, "I need to ask you to come with me," he said. "Judge Doyle has filed a formal health inspection request for the premises. County ordinance requires the owner to be present." "There was an inspection 6 weeks ago," Agnes said. "It was clean." "There's been a complaint filed," Wade said. "I'm required to follow up on it." "What complaint?" Agnes asked. Wade's jaw tightened slightly. "Overcrowding," he said. He did not look pleased about the word. Agnes looked at him with the level expression of a woman who had seen this before, and had the particular weariness of someone who kept seeing it anyway. "I have 3 guests currently," she said. "The building's capacity is 8. "I understand that," Wade said. "I'm required to follow up on filed complaints. That's the process." "The process," Agnes said. "Agnes." His voice had dropped. It was the voice of a man saying something underneath what he was saying, something he couldn't say directly. "I need you to come with me. I need you to let me do my job." Clara stepped forward, not aggressively, just enough. Wade looked at her. His expression shifted into something careful and measuring. "Mrs. Dunbar," he said. "Sheriff," she said. "I'd like to understand the complaint. Who filed it?" "That's county information. Filed through the circuit court," she said. "Which means Judge Doyle's office. Which means the judge has filed a complaint against a private citizen's property on the same morning that citizen was present in that property with 2 people he's been trying to move out of his county." She paused. "That's a remarkable coincidence." Wade's jaw moved. The deputy behind him had stopped writing in his notepad. "I'm doing my job," Wade said. "That's all." "I know you are," Clara said. "And I'm asking who told you to do it this morning specifically." Something happened in Wade's face. Not anger, not dismissal. Something closer to the expression of a man who had been asked a question he already knew the answer to and had been hoping to avoid being asked. He looked at Agnes. He looked at Hal. He looked at the ledger under Clara's arm. He said very quietly, "There are people in this town who have been watching what happens to folks who push back against certain arrangements. They're watching right now." He stopped. "I'm not saying anything more than that." "You don't have to," Clara said. He held her gaze for a moment that had several things in it, most of which he wasn't going to say out loud. Then he looked at Agnes. "I need to do the inspection," he said. "It'll be quick. It'll be clean. And then it'll be on record that it was done and came back clean, and that record will be harder to use against you than no record at all." He paused. "That's the most I can do right now." Agnes looked at him for a long time. "All right, Curtis," she said. "Come in and do your inspection." He came in. He was thorough, and he was fast, and he wrote everything down in the neutral, precise language of a man who was making sure there was nothing in his record that could be used as a lever. The deputy stood in the doorway and did not write anything in his notepad. When it was done, Wade closed his notebook. He looked at Hal. He said, "I heard your fence line at the north pasture needs some work." He said it to the wall, not to Hal, like a man saying something to a room. Hal looked at him. "Does it?" he said. "Might want to get to it before the weather shifts," Wade said. "Things have a way of going wrong with fencing when people's attention is elsewhere." He looked at the floor. "Kids all right out at your place?" "They're fine," Hal said. "Good," Wade said. He put his hat on. He walked out without looking at Clara again. The deputy followed. The door closed. The 3 of them stood in the boarding house in the aftermath of it. "He was warning us," Tommy said. Clara turned. Tommy was in the doorway from the back room, and she had not heard him come in, and she felt the cold drop of a mother who realizes her child has been listening to something she'd intended to protect him from. He was standing with his hands in his pockets and his face composed in the careful, older-than-10 expression he wore when he'd decided something. "Tommy," she said. "I followed you," he said. "I know I wasn't supposed to. I left Lily with Mrs. Pine next door. I needed to know what was happening." He looked at Agnes. "She's been holding on to that wire for 15 years, he said. "I heard it." Agnes looked at him with an expression Clara had not seen on the old woman's face before. Not pity, not indulgence, something that looked closer to recognition, one careful person seeing another. "You left your sister with a neighbor," Clara said. "Mrs. Pine is trustworthy," Tommy said. "I asked Agnes about her the first day we were here when you were talking to Hal." He looked at his mother directly. "I've been paying attention." Clara looked at her son for a long moment. The 10-year-old who had been carrying more than 10 years should carry for 8 months. The boy who had asked was that right what I said in a street in Sweetwater Junction, and waited for her answer like it was the most important question he'd asked all year. "You're going to Helena," Tommy said. "Aren't you?" "We're going to Helena," Hal said. "I'm coming," Tommy said. "No," Clara said. "Mama." "No," she said again, and her voice was not hard, just final in the way that certain things were final, not because she was angry, but because she knew exactly what she was protecting and was not going to compromise it. "You are staying here. You are staying with Lily, and you are not opening the gate for anyone, and that is not a discussion." Tommy looked at her. He looked at Hal. He looked at Agnes. Then he looked back at his mother, and she could see in his face the precise moment when the argument in him settled into something else. Something that was not surrender, but was the mature, difficult choice of a person who understood that sometimes the thing you were asked to do was harder than the thing you wanted to do. "All right," he said, "but you come back." "I'll come back," she said. "You promise." She crossed the room and put both hands on his shoulders and looked at him straight. "I have never once promised you something I didn't intend to keep," she said. "I promise." He held her eyes for a moment. Then he nodded once, the small decisive nod of someone who had weighed something and made a choice to trust it. He stepped back. He looked at Hal. "You take care of her," he said. Something moved in Hal's face. "I'll bring her back," he said. Agnes had been watching all of this in silence. Now she reached into the drawer again, past where the wire was, and produced a sealed envelope thick with papers and set it on the counter. "Take this with you," she said. "Joseph's copy of the transfer document, his annotations, my written account of that night, and of the wire. Signed and dated." She paused. "I've been waiting 15 years to put this in someone's hand. I need to know it's going somewhere. It can't be made to disappear." Clara picked up the envelope and put it inside the ledger, alongside Hal's documentation. She held the ledger against her chest and felt the weight of it. 11 families, one dead man's careful handwriting, 15 years of Agnes Fuller, sitting with something that burned and staying anyway. "We leave at first light tomorrow," Hal said. "He'll know before then," Agnes said. "Wade's report will go through the circuit office. Doyle will see that you were here this morning. He'll start calculating." "Then he can calculate while we ride," Clara said. Agnes looked at her with the expression she'd worn the very first morning when Clara had set 2 pennies on her counter for coffee she hadn't asked for. The expression of a woman who had decided something after a long deliberation. "Mrs. Dunbar," she said, "what you said to Margaret Doyle in that store yesterday, half the town heard about it by supper." She paused. "You should know that 3 people came to my counter this morning before you arrived. 3 people I've known for years who have been very careful for a very long time." She looked at the ledger. "They asked me if it was true that someone was finally doing something." Clara was quiet. "I told them I thought so," Agnes said. "I told them to be ready." Outside on the main street of Sweetwater Junction, the ordinary business of the day was continuing. Wagon wheels on dry ground. Someone calling across the street. The sound of a town that looked the same as it had looked every day for 15 years, and was not this morning quite the same at all. Clara walked out into it with the ledger in her arms, and Tommy beside her, and Hal a step behind, and she did not look at the courthouse at the end of the block, or think about the man behind the desk in it. She thought about First Light tomorrow. She thought about the road north to Helena. She thought about a federal land commissioner named Arthur Webb, who had never received a letter because it had been intercepted before it could travel. This time it wouldn't be a letter. This time she was going to walk through the door herself. They left before dawn, the way Clara had said they would, the sky still black above the tree line, and the air carrying the first edge of autumn that August sometimes allowed in Montana, a warning that the warmth was borrowed, and the lender would want it back. Tommy was at the gate when they brought the horses out. He had not slept much. Clara could see it in his face, the particular tightness around his eyes of a person who had spent the night in the company of their own worry. But he was standing straight, and his hands were loose at his sides, and he had Lily beside him, which meant he had gotten his sister up and dressed and brought her out in the dark without being asked. Lily walked to Clara and pressed herself against her side without speaking. Clara held her for a moment, both arms, the full weight of her daughter against her chest. 4 days, Clara said into the top of Lily's head. Maybe 5. I'll send word when we reach Helena. Lily pulled back and looked at her. In the gray pre-dawn light, her face was very serious, the careful, evaluating expression she wore when she was deciding whether to trust something. Then she reached into her coat pocket and produced the small woven wreath she'd made 3 days ago, dried now, but still holding its shape. She held it out. Clara took it. She looked at it. She put it in her coat pocket. "Thank you," she said. Lily nodded once, satisfied, and stepped back. Tommy walked to Hal. He looked up at him the way he'd been looking at him for 2 weeks, measuring, still deciding, but the distance between measuring and decided had gotten shorter every day. "You know this road?" he asked. "I've ridden it twice," Hal said. "Then you know where it's hard," Tommy said. "I do." "Don't let anything happen to her," Tommy said. He said it the way he said things when he meant them, completely flat and direct, with none of the performance that adults put around difficult requests. Hal looked at him for a moment. "I'll bring her back, Tommy. You have my word." Tommy nodded. He held out his hand. Hal shook it man to man without making anything of the gesture or diminishing it. Tommy turned away before either of them could see what that cost him to keep his face steady through. Clara mounted up. Hal mounted up. They rode north out of the ranch yard in the dark, with the last stars still holding above the mountains, and the road empty and cold ahead of them. They did not talk much in the first hours. There was something between them on that road that had been building for 15 days in kitchen conversations and barn doorways, and the particular silences of 2 people who had stopped performing ease around each other because the performances had gotten in the way of the actual thing. Clara had stopped analyzing it the night before. She had decided to let it be what it was without requiring it to have a name yet. Around mid-morning, Hal said, "Tell me about Daniel." She looked at him. He was watching the road, not her. "What do you want to know?" she asked. "What he was like," Hal said. "Not the debt, not the illness. What he was like before all of that." Clara was quiet for a while. The horses moved steady beneath them. "He laughed easily," she said finally. "Not loudly. He had a quiet laugh, the kind that came from somewhere genuine, and not from wanting to be seen laughing. He thought Tommy was the funniest person he'd ever met, and he told him so regularly, which I think is part of why Tommy is the way he is." She paused. "He was terrible with money and honest about it. He'd say, 'I don't understand it, and I know I don't understand it, and I trust you to handle it,' and then he'd go back to whatever he was doing, which was usually something he was genuinely good at." She looked at the horizon. "He was a good doctor when he had what he needed to work with. He had the kind of patience with suffering that most people can't sustain because it costs too much. He sustained it. She stopped. I miss that version of him more than I've said to anyone. Hal was quiet. You said you'd learned what happens when you trust things that aren't solid, he said carefully. I said I'd married a man I thought I knew, she said. I knew him. I just didn't know the financial situation he'd gotten us into. He kept it from me because he was ashamed and because he thought he could fix it before I had to know. She paused. He was wrong about that. But he wasn't wrong about most other things. She looked at Hal sideways. I'm not angry at him. I was for a while. I'm not anymore. Hal nodded. He looked at the road. My brother was afraid of everything, he said. I used to think that was a character flaw. Spent years being impatient with him about it. He flexed the left hand once the small reflexive movement she'd learned to recognize. When I was working Pinkerton cases, I thought I understood what courage was. I thought it was doing the hard thing, not flinching. He stopped. Hebe. Turned out I was confusing not flinching with not feeling. Those aren't the same thing. What happened to him? Clara asked. He got involved with men who told him they could fix a debt he had, Hal said. I knew something was wrong. I was working a case. I told myself I'd get to him when I finished. His jaw was set. I finished the case. I didn't get to him in time. He paused. I put that badge on the desk of a man I didn't respect and walked out, and I haven't worked for anyone else since. Clara looked at his profile. You've been punishing yourself for 3 years, she said. I've been being careful, he said. Those aren't always different things either, she said. He was quiet for a long time. The road ran through dry grass, and the mountains ahead were the color of something that had always been there, and would always be there, indifferent and permanent, and beautiful in the way that things were beautiful when they didn't need anything from you. No, he said finally. They're not. They rode through the afternoon and into the early evening, stopping once to water the horses and eat what Clara had packed sitting in the thin shade of the wagon, and not talking about what was ahead, because both of them had enough experience with difficult things to know that narrating them in advance was its own kind of damage. They talked about the ranch instead, about what the north pasture needed before winter, about the chicken coop repair that had been on Hal's list since spring, about whether the gray mare who Lily had named without being asked had the temperament for a child to learn to ride on. She does, Hal said. She's patient. Lily will want to start immediately, Clara said. I know, he said. I've been watching her with that horse for 2 weeks. She's got a feel for it. Clara looked at him. You noticed that. Hard not to, he said. Then after a pause, she's a remarkable kid, Clara. Both of them are. Clara looked at her hands. She was still not entirely accustomed to the sound of her given name in his voice, the plain, unadorned use of it that said the formality had been set aside not carelessly but deliberately. She thought she would get accustomed to it. She thought she might not mind that process. They reached Helena late the next afternoon, road stiffened and dry with dust, and found the federal land office on the 2nd Street above the main avenue. A clerk with ink-stained cuffs told them the commissioner was in conference until 4 and asked them to wait. They waited. Arthur Webb was 61 years old and had the look of a man who had been bureaucratically patient for so long that he had started to find it interesting. He looked at Hal when they came in, then at Clara, then at the ledger and the envelope she set on his desk. We're from Sweetwater Junction, Clara said. Mayher County. I know Mayher County, Webb said. Judge Doyle's territory. Formerly, Clara said. Webb looked at her. Something shifted in his expression, not surprise exactly, but the alert attention of a person who had just heard a word that changed the shape of a sentence. Sit down, Mrs. Dunbar, she said. Clara Dunbar. She opened the ledger. Mr. Webb, I'm going to show you 11 documented cases of fraudulent land transfers carried out through Mayher County's Circuit Court over 6 years each, following the same pattern. I'm also going to show you a case from 1868 that predates those 11 and establishes the method, the perpetrator, and the probable cause of a man's death on a county road. She put her hands flat on the desk on either side of the open ledger. And I'm going to ask you to act on it before we leave this office because the man responsible has known where we were going since yesterday morning, and we have 2 children back in Sweetwater Junction. Webb looked at the ledger. He looked at Hal. He looked at Clara. He picked up the ledger and began to read. He read for 53 minutes. Clara counted because counting was something to do with the part of her mind that wanted to run ahead to outcomes she couldn't control yet. Hal sat beside her and was still in the way. He was still when something mattered, completely present, not performing patience, but actually having it. When Webb set the ledger down, he said, "The Crane case." He looked at the envelope. "This is the annotated copy." "In the man's own handwriting," Clara said. "Dated, witnessed by his wife, showing specific clause alterations between the document he was shown and the document he signed." "And the wire," Webb said. "In Agnes Fuller's possession in Sweetwater Junction," Clara said. "She's kept it 15 years. She'll surrender it to a federal investigator." Webb folded his hands on the desk. He looked at the window. He looked back at them. "You understand what happens when I file a federal investigation request into a sitting circuit court judge," he said. "He loses his ability to act through official channels," Clara said, "which is the only protection we have for the families still in his county." "He'll still have unofficial options," Webb said. "He's already using those," Hal said. "He burned Agnes Fuller's front room 4 days ago. He'll do more." He paused. "We're not asking you to make it safe, Mr. Webb. We're asking you to make it official, because once it's official, every action he takes becomes evidence." Webb looked at Hal for a long moment. "You were Pinkerton," he said. Hal said nothing. "I know the name Brixton," Webb said. "There was a case, Eastern Montana. You walked off it." "I walked off the company," Hal said. "The case I finished." Webb studied him. Then he looked at Clara. "You've been in Meagher County how long?" 17 days, she said. Something moved across Webb's face that might, on a man who smiled more, have been a smile. He reached into his desk and produced a form and began to write. "I'm filing a federal investigative hold on all pending circuit court proceedings in Meagher County, effective immediately," he said. "I'm issuing a protective order for every property named in this ledger." He wrote without stopping. "And I'm dispatching 2 federal marshals to Sweetwater Junction by tomorrow morning." He looked up. "They'll arrive before you do." Clara felt the cold thing in her chest that had been there since the day Doyle had said her name on the main street of Sweetwater Junction begin slowly to release its grip. She breathed through it. She did not let it show as anything other than a steady exhale. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet," Webb said. "He's going to fight this. Men like Doyle don't go quietly." "I know," she said. "But he'll be fighting it on the record now, in the open in front of people who are writing things down." She paused. "That's all I needed." They rode back to Sweetwater Junction through the second day, with the same steady purpose they'd ridden north with, and a different quality of silence between them. The silence of people who have done the hard thing and are now living in the time between doing it and seeing what it costs. Around the midpoint of the second day, Hal said, "When this is over." Clara looked at him. "When Doyle is off the bench and the county has settled," he said. He was looking at the road. "I've been thinking about the south room, off the main house." She waited. "It gets the morning light," he said. "Better than the bunkhouse, warmer in winter." He kept his eyes forward. "I thought if you had a reason to stay, not just employment, a real reason, something that belonged to you and the children, the south room would make more sense than the bunkhouse." Clara looked at the road ahead, the mountains in the distance, the long grass on either side of them moving in the afternoon wind. She thought about Daniel telling Tommy that a man's word was worth more than his contract. She thought about Lily reaching out for a plant that looked like a weed but wasn't. She thought about Tommy standing at the ranch gate in the dark, asking a man he'd known for 2 weeks to bring his mother back. "That's a large thing to say out on a road," she said. "I've been trying to find the right place to say it for about a week," Hal said. "I didn't find a better one." She looked at him. His profile, the line of his jaw, the way he held the reins in his good hand, with the bad hand resting on his knee, neither hiding it nor drawing attention to it, simply having it the way a person had everything that had happened to them present and accounted for and not apologized for. "I'm not easy," she said. "I know that," he said. "I'll reorganize things without asking. I'll work faster than you expect, and I'll tell you when something needs doing, whether you've noticed it yet or not." "I noticed," he said. "I didn't mind." "My children come first," she said, "in every calculation." "I'd think less of you if they didn't," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "I'm not looking to be rescued," she said. "I haven't been looking for that since the first week after Daniel died." "I know," he said. "I'm not offering that." He glanced at her sideways. "I'm offering company. Honest company. Someone who will be at the fence when you ride back in." She turned that over. She turned over everything it meant: the 6 weeks, the kitchen table, the barn doorway, Tommy's handshake, Lily's wreath sitting in her coat pocket right now. She turned it over the way you turned over something small and unexpectedly solid, testing its weight before you decided what to do with it. "The south room gets the morning light," she said. "It does," he said. "I'll want to put up shelves," she said. Something happened in his face. "I'll get the lumber," he said. They rode the last stretch in a silence that was different from every silence before it, and Clara looked at the road running north and felt something settle in her chest that had not been settled in 8 months, maybe longer, maybe years before Daniel died. The particular settling of a person who has been carrying something at a run and has finally found ground solid enough to set it down on. They came into Sweetwater Junction late in the afternoon to find 2 federal marshal's horses tied at the post outside the courthouse, and Judge Emmett Doyle's carriage absent from its usual place on the far side of the building. Agnes Fuller was on the boarding house porch when they passed, and she raised one hand to them without expression, which was the Agnes Fuller version of celebration. Sheriff Curtis Wade was standing in front of his office, and he watched them ride past, and he touched the brim of his hat to Clara, a brief, deliberate gesture, and then he looked away. She filed it. It cost him something, and he'd done it anyway. The ranch road was quiet, and the yard was quiet when they came through the gate, and then Tommy came out of the barn at a dead run and pulled up short 5 feet from Clara's horse with his hands at his sides, and his face doing the complicated thing it did when he was feeling too many things to process in order. Clara dismounted. She crossed the 5 feet. She put her arms around him. He held on for a long time. She let him. When he pulled back, his eyes were dry, which had cost him, and she didn't say anything about the cost. "Lily's with the gray horse," he said. "She's been out there most of the day." "Talking to her?" Clara asked. "Talking to her," Tommy confirmed. He looked at Hal. "Did it work?" "Federal marshals are at the courthouse right now," Hal said. Tommy looked at the ground. He nodded slowly. He looked up. "So Doyle is finished," Clara said. "Not today, not by morning. It'll take time and it'll be fought. But he's finished." Tommy was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Agnes told me something before you left. She said the first 3 people who came to her counter the morning you went to see her, they'd been waiting for someone to do something for years." He paused. "She said when she told them you were doing it, one of the women cried." Clara looked at her son. "I thought you should know that," Tommy said. "That it wasn't just us. That there were people here who needed it too." She put her hand on the back of his neck and held it there for a moment. "I know," she said. "That's why it mattered." She found Lily and the horse pen exactly where Tommy had said, standing on the bottom rail of the fence, with her arms over the top, and her face close to the gray mare's nose, talking in the low, continuous murmur she used with the horse, the same voice she'd used before with Clara when the world was ordinary enough to trust. The mare was completely still. Her ears were forward. Lily turned when she heard Clara's boots in the dirt. She looked at her mother's face for a long moment, reading it the way she read everything carefully, completely, taking in every detail before she committed to a response. Then she climbed down from the fence and walked across and put her hand in Clara's. "You came back," she said. "I told you I would," Clara said. Lily leaned her head against Clara's arm. She looked at the mare. "Her name is Clover," she said. "I decided." "That's a good name," Clara said. "She came over herself," Lily said. "I didn't chase her, I just stood still." Clara looked at her daughter. At the 7-year-old, who had been quiet for so long that every word she offered felt like a door opening wider than it had been before. At the child who had pressed herself into her mother's coat on the main street of a town that didn't want them, and had kept holding on through every door and every road and every day that required more than a child should have to give. "I know," Clara said. "That's exactly the right way." That evening they ate supper at the main house table for the second time, all 4 of them, and Tommy told Hal about the loose board in the barn that he'd fixed on the second day, and a second one he'd found on the third and hadn't fixed yet because he'd wanted to wait and show Hal where it was. Hal listened with the full attention of a man who understood that being listened to was how a person learned they were worth listening to. He asked Tommy what he'd used for the first repair. Tommy told him. Hal said it was the right choice. Lily ate her supper and drank her milk, and partway through the meal said to no one in particular, "I want to learn to ride Clover." Tommy looked at her. Hal looked at her. Clara looked at her. "We can start Saturday," Hal said. Lily nodded satisfied and went back to her supper. After the children were settled and the lamp in the bunkhouse had gone dark, Clara stood on the porch of the main house and looked out at the ranch, the fence lines barely visible in the dark, the barn, the horse pen where Clover moved in a slow drift, the enormous Montana sky overhead doing what it always did, holding everything without effort, indifferent and permanent, and vast. Hal came out and stood beside her. "There'll be a hearing," he said. "Webb said weeks, maybe a month. We'll both be called to give testimony." "I know," she said. "The families he moved, most of them are gone. The land won't come back to them easily." "No," she said, "but their names will be in the record. What was done to them will be in the record." She paused. "That's not nothing. It's not enough, but it's not nothing." He was quiet for a moment. "Joseph Crane's annotated copy," he said. "It'll be the centerpiece of the fraud case. Webb said it was the most clearly documented prejudicial corruption evidence he'd seen in 20 years. "Joseph Crane was a careful man," Clara said. "He made a copy because he didn't trust what he was being given. He wrote down every difference because he understood that details were the thing that couldn't be argued away." She looked at the dark. He was right. It just took 15 years for anyone to get the copy to the right place. "Agnes is going to rebuild the front room," Hal said. "She told me before we left. Said she was going to make it bigger than it was before." "Good," Clara said. He turned slightly toward her. In the dim porch light, his face was the same face she'd been reading for 17 days, the one that had been made and remade by weather and harder things, and had settled into an honesty she hadn't expected to find here in this territory after 8 months of doors closing in her face. She had learned to read it the way she learned everything useful, carefully, without rushing, paying attention to what it did when it didn't know she was watching. "I meant what I said on the road," he said. "I know you did," she said. "The south room." "The south room," she said. She reached out and put her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, the careful, deliberate grip of a man who did not do things he didn't mean, and she held on. The land stretched out around them, wide and real and enormous, and full of everything that still needed doing. The fencing and the garden beds and the testimony and the month of hearings ahead, and Tommy's education, and Lily's first writing lesson, and the shelves she was going to put up in the south room that got the morning light. Full of work and difficulty and the ordinary, extraordinary dailiness of a life being built on ground that had been tested and had held. Clara Dunbar had stepped off a stage in Sweetwater Junction, Montana territory with 22 cents and 2 children, and a town that had calculated her worth and found it wanting. She had not accepted that calculation. She had not folded under the pressure of a man who confused having power with being right. She had not waited for someone to open the doors. She had walked to every closed one and asked the question that mattered, not who will help me, but what needs doing, and she had done it. She had learned in the last 17 days what she had suspected for the last 8 months, and had not yet had the room to confirm that the thing they had never been able to take from her. Not the creditors, not the illness, not the debt. Not 8 months of careful killing. Pity was the same thing they had tried to take from Agnes Fuller, and from Joseph Crane, and from 11 families, and from every person Emmett Doyle had looked at and decided was manageable. The belief that she had the right to stand on solid ground and call it hers. She had always had that. She had it still. And standing on this porch, on this ranch, under this sky, with her children breathing in the dark, and her hand in the hand of a man who had watched the road for her the whole time she was gone, she was not waiting for anything anymore. She was already home.